Let's bring in Alex Conant in our Washington bureau. He's a CBSN political contributor and former communications director for Senator Marco Rubio. Okay, Alex, we've heard Republicans in the Senate, many of them not supporting this bill. Senator Bill Cassidy says he's not sure what the rush is. So what is the rush, and what are the chances that Republicans will actually meet their own deadline?
Well, we'll find out soon enough. If they don't pass it by the end of this week, I think the odds of it ever passing are dramatically reduced because they need to get this off the plate. The longer that, as we saw with the House bill, the longer it sort of sits out there in the sun, the longer people look at it, the more it stinks, the less public support there is for the legislation. That's part of why nobody saw the final piece of legislation until Thursday and why Leader McConnell was rushing to get it done this week.
Alex, we're hearing, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so, some members are very uncomfortable with the push. You just played the clip from Ron Johnson. My former boss, Marco Rubio, has expressed concern about the rush. But on the other hand, there's no guarantee that if they let it sit out there for weeks on end, that the public support will grow for it at any point.
We're hearing that these cuts in Medicaid are what many people on Capitol Hill have issue with. What do you think? I mean, is this a hurdle that can ultimately be resolved with these big cuts?
Well, I certainly think that it can all be resolved. I mean, this bill has a very decent chance of passing. I wouldn't say a good chance, but a decent chance of passing. I think most people would put it at about 50-50. There are many members who have said that they oppose it in its current state, but there's going to be plenty of time for amendments this week, and so the bill will change over the next couple of days here, and in the course of those changes, it can win more support. The Medicaid that you point out, that is a critical issue for a lot of the moderate senators, including senators like Rob Portman, Cory Gardner, Heller in Nevada, who's up for a tough re-election next year. That's a big issue for them because they are states that have expanded their Medicaid programs under Obamacare. So there's the potential that people in those states could lose their health insurance under this Senate bill. Obviously, those moderate senators are concerned about that.
And Alex, when you talk about the CBO releasing the score possibly as soon as Monday, how much of an impact do you think that'll have on this entire debate?
I think it'll actually have a big impact, like we saw in the House. If the CBO report comes out and says that more than 20 million Americans are going to lose their health insurance under the Senate bill, a number that was similar to the House bill, I think that puts a lot of pressure on those moderate senators to not support the legislation. It's going to be tough for them to go back to their constituents and explain why millions of Americans are losing health insurance under this legislation. That said, there could be some good news in the CBO report as well, especially what it does for the deficit. If, like we saw in the House bill, it shows that this legislation is terrific for the deficit, it gives Leader McConnell a lot of freedom to kind of try to cut some deals with some of those moderate senators. For example, in states that are gravely impacted by opioids, if there's deficit savings in the CBO report, he could use those savings to fund more opioid programs. I could see that having a real impact on somebody like Senator Rob Portman.
Yeah, opioid epidemic, such a big issue here and affecting so many lives. I want to ask you, Alex, about the Russia investigation. The president says that former President Barack Obama should have done more to stop Russia from interfering with the election. In the past, the president called the whole Russia story a hoax. Is he changing course here?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be the first time that Trump says one thing one day and then the exact opposite thing a couple of weeks later as the sort of the narrative shifts from blaming him to blaming somebody else. Look, I don't think there's any question that the President Obama's handling of Russia's meddling in the election was clearly one of the biggest mistakes of his presidency. And I think history will look very poorly on how the Obama administration handled Russia's meddling. The Washington Post report this week, which is what led to Trump's tweet today, is devastating, just absolutely devastating for the Obama administration. They knew Russia was trying to have an impact on our elections, trying to meddle with our democratic institutions, and they did next to nothing to prevent it. That is shameful, and I think Trump is right to blame to blame Obama, ask why the Obama administration didn't do more. Of course, it doesn't make the FBI investigation into the Trump campaign's possible collusion with the Russians any more, or it doesn't impact that at all. It doesn't make that any less serious. And we still don't know what the U.S. government is doing to prevent foreign governments from meddling in our elections in the futures. We know that the Russian government is continuing to try to meddle in elections in Europe. We saw that in France, and we expect to see it again in the German elections this fall. We have midterms next year. Is there any question that the Russian government isn't going to try to help candidates that it feels are beneficial to it in the midterms? And if they do that, what is the U.S. government's response? What are we doing to dissuade them from doing that? Trump has yet to address that.
Yeah, that certainly is a very big question. I want to ask you as well about Trump's next move with Russia. We know the Senate overwhelmingly passed sanctions against Russia. What do you think the White House should do? Should they be tougher on Russia? The president's set to meet with Vladimir Putin next month.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Trump administration's handling of Russia makes no sense. They started the administration with lots of fawning words for the Russian government, looking the other way on Putin's meddling in the U.S. election, as we just discussed, and you know, not strongly supporting the sanctions that the Obama administration put on Russia in the final days of the Obama administration. And then weeks later, we saw Trump bomb the Assad regime in Syria, which obviously goes against what the Russian government wants. And so now we're sort of in no man's land when it comes to how the U.S. government, how the Trump administration is dealing with Russia. I think what you saw the U.S. Senate do this week was take a firm stand in how the U.S. government should handle Russia, which is we should be treating them for what they are, which is people, which are enemies, people that do not have our best interests in mind, and put strong sanctions on the Russian government to really try to limit their continued interference in our interests around the globe.
There are some Republicans who want an open investigation into Russia meddling, but there are lawmakers who are afraid of angering the president. So if you're a Republican, how do you go about doing this?
Well, I think you can't worry about your short-term political interests. I mean, I think obviously there is short-term political gain in not angering the Trump administration, but I think any politician is always smart to think about the long term and how will history judge your actions in the future. And in this case, something as important as a foreign government meddling in an American election, I think clearly the right thing to do is to support the investigation and get to the bottom of it, and then let the chips fall where they may. And I think if you look at the Republicans in the U.S. Senate, for the most part, that's exactly how they're handling him. If you watch the the Senate Intelligence Committee's hearings in recent weeks, all of those Republicans are very sober about the investigation. They're very open-minded about it, and I think that they will follow the case wherever the facts may lead.
Alex Conant in Washington for us. Thanks for joining us, Alex.
Hey, thank you very much.